Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning for the kickoff of VFN's Social Justice Funders Networking Group. I'm Katie Moore. I'm the CEO of VFN, and I have the privilege of opening up today's session. As many of you have observed over the last 15 years, the Commonwealth has gone from a solidly red state to a battleground purple, and now pretty solidly blue. This shift, according to political science and sociological experts, has had a few key motivators, including demographic shifts and also growing attention to race and equality. Over the last 30 years, Virginia's population has increased by 38%. The largest concentration growth has been in densely settled urban and suburban areas, particularly in Northern Virginia. As Virginia's population has grown, it's also become more educated and wealthier. Households earning at least $150,000 have grown at 3 times the rate of the overall population. Our immigrant population has also grown. Today, 10% of Virginia's eligible voters are foreign born, and that's up from just 3.5% back in 1990. So, however, these concentrated urban and suburban growth rates are really fueling the state's rising urban and rural divide as well. As we've all witnessed, our nation has been in the midst of a racial awakening over the last few years, and Virginia is no exception to this. In 2019, Virginia became the first state in the nation to appoint a cabinet-level chief diversity and equity and inclusion officer. As we know, Dr. Janice Underwood and her team are working to address systemic racism and inequality throughout state government and create more inclusive practices through the One Virginia Plan. And at the same time, Virginia is still grappling with its racist past. In 2019, the Commonwealth had more Confederate monuments than any other state. It's 244 in total when you count bridges, roads, and statues. Earlier this year, after years of protests and civil unrest, Governor Northam signed a bill giving localities the power to remove, relocate, contextualize, or cover Confederate statues in public spaces. But there's still a lot of work to be done in this area, but the capital of the Confederacy is also leading the way in a number of areas, including voting rights, marijuana legalization, and the abolition of the death penalty. As states across the South are racing to establish new voting restrictions, Virginia is actually bolting in the opposite direction. We're increasingly encouraging our citizens, especially people of color, to exercise their democratic rights. In the last 18 months alone, Virginia has, for example, repealed the state's voter ID law, enacted a 45-day no excuse absentee voting, made Election Day a state holiday, and also enacted automatic voter registration for anyone who receives a Virginia driver's license. In addition, earlier this year, Virginia became the 15th state to legalize marijuana. This has some major equity components, since for decades, minorities and economically disadvantaged populations have been jailed and fined at drastically disproportionate rates for marijuana use and possession. According to the findings of American Civil Liberties Union report last year, in 2018, American police officers made more arrests for marijuana violations than all other violent crimes combined. The new marijuana legalization bill also specifically gives social equity entrepreneurs, including people who have been charged with marijuana-related offenses, preference once the state starts granting licenses. I thought was a really intentional inclusion by the bill's writers. Virginia also, when they abolished the death penalty earlier this year, which is really pretty incredible. From 1608 through 2019, Virginia executed nearly 1,400 people, more than any other state in the U.S., even more than Texas. Of the 377 individuals that Virginia has executed in the 20th century, nearly 79% were Black. On March 24th this year, Virginia became the 23rd state and the first in the South to eliminate capital punishment. So, but of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from today's panelists and deepening our collective knowledge through this social justice networking group. I have the pleasure of working alongside Stephanie Glenn and Lenny Dworkis, co-chairs of the Social Justice Funders Networking Group. Stephanie is the Vice President of Diversity and Engagement for the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond, and Lenny's the Program Manager for the Weisberg Foundation in Arlington. Thank you both so much for your leadership of this group. We're excited to work with you throughout this year. We also have Three incredible panelists joining us today. I want to welcome Phil Hernandez. He's the Senior Policy Fellow and Counsel for the Commonwealth Institute. He's going to be our moderator today. Leo Whitehurst Gibson is the Executive Director of Virginia Community Voice, and Thomas Asefa is the Organizing Director for New Virginia Majority. Thank you all so much for joining us, and Phil, I'll turn it over to you. And now I have the opportunity of introducing the Social Justice Funders Networking Group's co-chairs. Stephanie Glenn is the Vice President of Diversity and Engagement for the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond, and Lenny Dworkis is the Program Manager for the Weisberg Foundation in Arlington. I'm so grateful for their leadership and guidance as we've put together this kickoff event, and we're excited to work with them over the course of the next year to really shape the programming of the Social Justice Funders Networking Group. Thank you both for your leadership. And now I have the opportunity to introduce you to today's three incredible panelists. First, I'd like to thank Phil Hernandez, Senior Policy Fellow and Counsel for the Commonwealth Institute, for joining us as today's moderator. Phil has an incredible background, and you can check out his bio on the Commonwealth Institute's website. We also have Leo Whitehurst Gibson, the Executive Director of Virginia Community Voice, joining us, and Thomas Asefa, the Organizing Director for New Virginia Majority. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to learning with you.
And I think that's actually a good segue into the first question, which really is hearing a little bit more about your organization and specifically how social, economic, racial justice sort of underpins your vision and the programmatic work that you do at your organization. I don't know, Thomas, you want to go first since it seemed to be at the tip of your tongue there?
Sure, yeah. So we focus most of our work in Virginia's urban crescent, so in Northern Virginia, Central Virginia, and Hampton Roads, primarily organizing working class communities of color. And since our inception in 2007, we've reached out to over 1 million voters and registered over 200,000 Virginia voters through nonpartisan civic engagement activities, engaging voters on social and economic justice issues. We also, do deep community organizing in these locations. We, across the Commonwealth, have over 29,000 members. And our theory of change is rooted in the assumption that because of an imbalance of power, that working class communities of color and low-income communities suffer the indignities that's at the heart of poverty, unjust living conditions, incarceration. And so at the heart of our approach to social justice is the commitment and really year in, year out, hard work of building power among those directly impacted and collectively leveraging that power at local and state levels to achieve racial and economic justice. So, we're a membership-based, membership-driven organization. And like I said, our folks, our members are mainly people who are directly impacted by unjust conditions across the Commonwealth, recognizing that it is folks who are directly impacted who are closest to the solutions that we should be advancing.
Thank you, Thomas.
I was on the hard agree. I'm such a big fan of Thomas and the work that they do that I was just like, I don't even know what am I going to say about what we do. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Virginia Majority, and it makes my heart happy to be able to see two organizers on a call like this, because not too long ago that wouldn't be it wouldn't be something that would be happening. Organizing is something that I'm so glad that there's this kind of attention on. So at Virginia Community Voice, we kind of the work that we do and how we kind of focus on social justice, we really are born, our organization was born out of kind of that like space, is that we're a social justice organization. Again, my roots are in community organizing, and the more traditional organizing like Thomas does is like where my roots are. And so that's kind of what we've been born from. But kind of the specific ways that we do it, we have two programs that we run with Virginia Community Voice. The first is called RVA Thrives, and that's a program that we've been running for 5 years, specifically on the south side of Richmond City, within the city limits, and particularly on the formerly Jeff Davis Richmond Highway corridor, and working with neighbors in that community. So if Thomas's work is more statewide and kind of we're very like hyper neighborhood focused. We focus on this neighborhood in this community because this community has been historically marginalized. It's been left behind in ways that the rest of the city of Richmond even has not. And neighbors, when we first started working down there, said, you know, I can't believe you're coming down to listen to us because no one listens to us. And for, we're 20 years behind the rest of the city in lots of ways. And so RVA Thrives is really about that first part of our mission that I mentioned earlier, is equipping neighbors in historically marginalized communities to realize their vision for their community, and then to make sure that that the neighbors have resources that they need to see that vision to go forward. But we do a lot of, in that way, kind of traditional organizing. And so so for instance, one of the things that we're working on right now, and we very much come from the kind of the same perspective that Thomas mentioned, is that those who have experienced the problems should be at the center of the solution making, right? Because if you know what you experienced your whole life, then you've also come up with solutions to fix those problems. But more times than not, and historically in our country and in our communities, the people that have experienced the problems are not asked about what solutions they believe could come about to change the situation. And so that's really at the heart. And if you don't hear anything else I say today, that is kind of the heart of what we believe and why we do the work we do, is because we believe that those who are directly impacted are the ones who should be making the solutions to the problems that they're facing. And so RVA Thrives we have a steering committee that we work with every single month and throughout all the time, and they are the ones who direct where we go and the issues that we take on. And I'll give you a quick, for instance, of kind of how RVA Thrives works. Neighbors were really concerned about what's going on the South Side, because now all of a sudden the South Side is the frontier for building and gentrification and bringing in all of these, all this new housing and all these things. And neighbors who have lived there a long time, or even neighbors who consider the South Side a place where you can still get an affordable place to live, are concerned now about either getting pushed out of their homes or not being able to have a place that they can get an affordable apartment or home to live in. And so we started creating an equitable development scorecard with neighbors. For the last year, we've worked with neighbors to speak into what they want to see in their neighborhood around development. And we're going to use that tool in two ways. One, to hold our elected officials accountable to use to listen and to use this tool as a vetting tool for the development that might come to the South Side. And then the second way is to hold developers accountable for what they're building and what they're bringing to the South Side. And so that's kind of what RVA Thrives does. We work with neighbors to realize their vision and to kind of figure out how to collectively take that vision and hold it before those who have the power to make it happen. And then the second side of our work is our Community Voice Blueprint, which is a guide that we have written to help, because a lot of times people talk about, let's do community engagement. I want to do organizing, and we know that we need this, but we don't know how to do it. And so we've written a guide that's free to download on our website about how to do effective and equitable community engagement using our 4-step process, which is to listen, to connect neighbors and organize them around the issues that they want to see done in their community, to craft equitable solutions with neighbors, and then to reflect on the work that we've done and to make sure equity was not only the goal, but it was the process. And so that is from our community voice blueprint. We've developed trainings and coachings for institutions to kind of get to that second part of our mission, which is to prepare institutions to respond effectively. So that's kind of the two things that we do and the two processes that we go through.
Thank you, Leah. And it's interesting you both mentioned this idea that people who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, and in many ways that guides your work. And I can't help but think of, the way that we legislate in Virginia, which is, characterized by very short sessions. Typically, you blink and you miss them. Although over the last couple of years with the pandemic, and I think a special session last year to really dive into criminal justice reform, for the most part, it's a month or two of the year tops. So I'm wondering from both of you, how you work to build power in communities that is sort of longer term, that's more permanent and durable, and at the same time sort of growing the reach of your own organization.
Yes, Phil, this is, we see this as a long term, it's a long range vision, long range game. And building power in communities and growing the reach of our organization, we see that as one and the same. It happens simultaneously. So at New Virginia Majority, we have 3 specific ways or approaches to building power. One is through our deep community organizing work. And this happens, year round, day in, day out, where we go out and recruit directly impacted people from our key constituencies, bring them into our organization. So, whether through door knocking or other forms of cold contact outreach, bring them into our organization through various chapters that we have across these different locations I described in the Urban Crescent, and work to develop their leadership and to wage both local and statewide issue campaigns. So for example, in Northern Virginia, in Loudoun County, one of the most expensive places to live in the country, affordable housing is really hard to come by. And we work there primarily organizing the growing Latinx immigrant community. And right now, through, over the past 2 years of door knocking, community meetings, deep listening sessions, one-on-ones, and those kinds of things, have identified that one clear solution around affordable housing is getting the county to have a dedicated revenue stream for affordable housing. And so that's a campaign that our chapter out there has been working to get the county board of supervisors to move in that direction. In Richmond, we organize primarily formerly incarcerated people and their loved ones, both at the state and local levels. At the state level right now, our main campaign is to win and change the racist constitution of Virginia so that people with felony convictions have the right to vote. And so this happens, through our organizing work in our Southside chapter there. And at the local level also, so like you said, Phil, that's just, there's a small window of opportunity to work on that. But outside of the legislative session, there are other issues that folks are concerned about. And right now, our commitment is to move forward a campaign to ensure that people who are formerly incarcerated coming home have a place to live. Right, I think that's a critical issue that and an obstacle that a lot of formerly incarcerated people face as they re-enter society. And there's other examples of issue campaigns. So that's one approach. And then the second approach is our year-round voter engagement and mobilization. and getting out the vote. We have elections, as you know, in Virginia every year. And each year we engage hundreds of thousands of voters, primarily in the urban crescent. And then the third approach is our statewide policy advocacy work, where through the input of our members and the voters that we engage year round, focus on advancing key legislation at the state level around economic justice, affordable housing, expanding democracy, healthcare access, economic justice, environmental justice, through the General Assembly. And then, of course, embedded in all of these three approaches to building power includes, social media, earned media, and fundraising.
That's great. And for those of you who have not seen New Virginia Majority in Action organizing, if you see a large group of people wearing orange shirts knocking on doors, chances are you're looking at New Virginia Majority. So it's a great sight to see. And Leah, you mentioned sort of organizing really local communities, neighborhoods even. Does power building look any different in that context from what Thomas described?
Little. I think we traditionally engage people in similar ways. Like we're gonna engage people through one-on-one conversations, connecting from who they know to others, and growing the reach of the organization in that way. So that is in that way, like how we engage people in the work is similar, very similar. However, where we've kind of decided that our move, that things are a little different, is that we've decided that what we've kind of created and what we've worked to build on Richmond Highway with neighbors in that community, that it takes a lot of capacity, and it takes a lot of time and dedication. And so what we decided is, like, we're not going to have an RVA Thrives in every single community throughout Richmond, or even we're not going to grow our staff to a point where we have that many people doing that deep work in every community. What we've decided is that through our blueprint and our coaching of organizations, so institutions and then nonprofits who are interested in saying, like, hey, we want to do the same work. We think that the way that we grow is by building the capacity of other institutions, other organizations, with training and coaching on how to do organizing. Because I personally believe we need more organizers in the world. We need more people who understand how to do this work and how to do it well, and how to do it with equitably in the world. And so our kind of approach has been to kind of do our deep work on the corridor in Richmond, and then train and coach other institutions on how to, thank you, how to, sorry, I just got a direct chat. I thought that was to everyone, my bad. And how to do that work more deeply for their organization or institution in the communities that they work in. And so that's the way that we see our reach growing throughout the Commonwealth.
That's really helpful, and I'm also mindful that on this call we have broad representation across Virginia, not just Richmond and Nova. And Leah and Tom, I guess Leah, you talked about principles in your blueprint. Do you think that they are generally applicable to Southwest or Hampton Roads and sort of anywhere in the Commonwealth, or is there sort of more nuance?
Absolutely. I think that the principles of organizing communities are old and have been used for generations in our country and around the world, and how to bring people together, how to organize around common beliefs and common values and common issues, and learning how to engage people in that way, I think is it's a model. But the process for doing that in your individual community might look different based on the history of that community. So, like, one of the things in our blueprint is, like, in a community, when you're trying to organize and you're trying to engage people, you have to learn the history. You have to go back at least 50 years to understand the history of that place, to understand the history of that people, and understand what are some of the issues that people are going to face, and you organize based on the reality of that community. But when it comes to kind of the model of how to organize, how to bring people together, how to get to know people, how to do one-to-ones, how to build a larger coalition of people who have those values and want to see change around them, I think that model can be kind of taken and put in any place throughout the community.
That's incredibly helpful and good to keep in mind based on wherever we are on this call in Virginia. And now I just want to shift gears a little bit and ask for both of your thoughts in terms of, what do you need from philanthropy in Virginia to change from a social justice and equity standpoint going forward?
Thomas, I was going to say I'm happy to jump in here if you,
Go ahead.
unless you want to go for it, because there's lots to say, I'm sure, from both of our perspectives. So I think the general kind of my general feeling about what needs to change in philanthropy, actually, there's a lot actually, because the history of philanthropy is based in a lot of things that it's based in, honestly, in white supremacy and racism and things that we know are the bedrocks that allow the issues that Thomas and I focus on a regular basis to persist, right? So we know that that's true. And happy to talk to anyone who in separate conversations who might say, like, tell me more about that. I'm happy to do that. But so I think to begin to change that, to begin to move that, we have to start with listening and learning about the history and being honest about that history, being honest about where some organizations here may be kind of younger donor advised funds or things like that that haven't had the like long reach of like an older philanthropic organization, but I know that they're both here, right? You're both here. The long philanthropic organizations with long histories, and kind of probably the younger organizations that are just kind of starting up. And so I think learning that history, understanding that history, understanding why that history means that organizations that are founded by people of color and run by people of color should have investment at different rates, right? Because we have been in this space for a really long time and have not gotten that kind of investment. And the reality is that from an organizing perspective, we have made significant strides even without that investment. But think about what we could do if we had that investment at the same level that historically white-led organizations are at. So I have lots of thoughts about this. I don't want to monopolize all the time, but I think the first piece is like being really open and hearing the truth about the history of your institution, of whatever institution you are a part of, understanding that, being clear about that, and also being transparent about that with your partners. And then I think spending time I think transparency is another big thing. So making sure that data is available, so we know, like, okay, what does it look like? What are the investments in Black-led or Black-founded? So I think there's a distinction there, Black-founded and Black-led. I think there are a lot of institutions that are now run by people of color that were founded by white people. And then what does that level of funding look like? But I think when we think about what fundraising needs to do, I think philanthropy needs to kind of really take a look at the history and understand what that history where that history has gotten us, and then take some time to say, like, where do we want to go? What do we want to change? And then how do we get there? And so I'll stop there for a second and let Thomas jump in.
I couldn't have said it any better, Leah, and I think that's very critical. not much to add here, except to say, in addition to the important point Leah just articulated, is that I think in order to realize lasting change, it's also critical for philanthropy to invest in organizations that are actively working to change power dynamics around race, class, gender, organizations that are actively doing this year in, year out, day in, day out, while rooted in working class communities, particularly working class communities of color across the Commonwealth. And so organizations that have at the root of their mission and vision a commitment to building the collective power of those communities, really exploring how are these organizations changing power dynamics, understanding that, as I said at the outset, our assumption is that there's a power imbalance, and hence why a lot of our communities are living in unjust conditions. How are you developing the leadership of working class communities to become change agents? I think those are the sort of the critical questions, and the approaches to power building to explore, and investing in those organizations is very critical.
That's great. And Leah, I'm just wondering if you might build on what you said. If you had a piece of advice for sort of the philanthropy community as we think about sort of Black-led organizations versus Black-founded organizations, which is a key distinction, like, is there any bits of wisdom that you can share on that front as we're thinking about changes going forward? I just thought it was a really good point, and I'm wondering if you.
Yeah, I think what I said earlier is there is a difference between an organization who was founded by white people and founded in with kind of those principles in mind, and then now is led by a person of color or a Black person. And that the legacy, the funding, all of that stuff, there's a history of funding that you're going to have if you've been founded and led by white people for most of the history of the organization. And now, for whatever reason, I'm sure there are multiple reasons, in part the moment that we're in and realizing that Black leadership is important, there's a shift there. That history and will be different than an organization that has been founded by people of color. And so I think the wisdom is like find out who those organizations are and 100% agree with what Thomas said. Grassroots organizations who are focusing on the root causes in communities and are focusing on racial injustice, and the reason 100% agree that we are experiencing the indignities in our communities is because there's a power imbalance, because our voices are not heard, our perspectives are not considered, and that has been intentional. And so making sure that you are intentional about finding and funding people who are in organizations led by people of color, founded by people of color, that we just get in general much less funding, and then also being transparent about those numbers, right? Like, so saying like, this is the percentage of the money that we have that goes to organizations led by people of color. This is the percentage of money that we have that doesn't, right? And thinking about that percentage. I also think, Phil, you're gonna get me on a long soapbox, but I also think that there's value in looking at the percentages of the overall foundation money that is being spent, right? The 5% is the federal mandate, right? You don't have to spend more than 5% on the interest of the organization, right? And so thinking about, what does that percentage look like? So maybe we don't take that percentage and say, oh, we have only 5% to spend, so we've got to give more to people of color. So maybe we say, let's move that to 7%. And we say 5% we have that we've been spending on the organizations we've spent it on, that stays there. This other 2% is only going to go to organizations that are founded and led by people of color, and see what happens. Let's just see what happens. 7%, that can't be too risky, right? And so that's where I think there can be some significant change in movement. And I think if there are lots of foundations who say, we're going to do this together, we're going to make these changes together, maybe we can move in that direction and just see what happens. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Leah. I think that was really amazing wisdom. And I'm only going to ask one more question because I see we have some questions coming in, and I want to make sure that we have ample time for those. But I guess one last related question is, when we think about philanthropy, there's obviously the financial support, the funding that is key, but also there's other stuff that comes with it, non-dollar resources to support their work. I'm wondering if you both could speak to the kinds of non-dollar resources that are most helpful in your work.
I guess I'll say, I imagine a lot of you have very deep and wide social networks, and so I would urge you all to push this notion of the importance of supporting power building institutions and organizations that have a long-term vision for building political power for and with working class communities of color. There's other ways too, like allying with organizations, particularly folks at the grassroots, whether it's through volunteer opportunities, at the same time centering the leadership of those who are directly impacted to be at the forefront or otherwise. But I imagine it's really tapping into your network and really talking to folks in your networks about these kinds of institutions that have at their root the commitment to shift the balance of power.
So I think this is an interesting question, because I think typically kind of my first response to this question was kind of an external response, but I think actually I deeply believe in organizational change, starting internally and then going externally, right? And so I think that thinking about the resources that your philanthropy has or your organization has internally. So I think about trust as a big resource, right? So trusting the staff that you have that are your BIPOC staff, so your Black, Indigenous, people of color on your staff, right? So trust is a huge resource. Trusting the organizations that you fund that are Black led or led by people of color, that I think is a huge piece, right? That's a resource, right? That we don't think of traditionally as like a resource, like, trust, but we know, again, if we look at the history, that white organizations have been able to trade in that resource of trust, right? Trust has been the thing that has allowed organizations that have been historically led by white people to get the funding. And so I think trust is a huge resource to continue to think about, like, trusting people of color. Like, that's a huge thing that needs to be kind of thought through. And as I said, again, kind of even just thinking about like what resources you have to have like transparency within your organization to the community. So start collecting and making public data on the percentage of charitable investments that go into BIPOC-led organizations and BIPOC serving communities. And then track the amount of funding that goes into BIPOC founded organizations, distinct from white founded organizations, so we can see kind of those distinctions. And then make a commitment to the percentage of investments and like I said, investments, dollar and non-dollar investments, that those things, that's still like, you can, non-dollar investments, that's something to track as well, to think about that. as well. And then, y'all, I'll say this, and again, the second thing directly, the first thing I hope that you remember is that people who are directly impacted should be at the center of making change. The second thing I hope you hear is please fund community organizing. Fund community organizing. Fund community organizing. I'll say it again, fund community organizing. It is what I have seen, and if you look historically, organizing, the March on Washington was an event, an organized event, right? And when we see big change, massive changes in our communities, it's because you have organized people using their collective power to make change in a community. And so if we fund that more, we will see those changes happen, positive change happen more. And so I think that is a big thing. It's just find grassroots organizing organizations and fund them. Those are my thoughts.
Fund community organizing, just to underline that a little bit more. And I'll just say too, from the work that we do at TCI, we primarily focused on state legislative change, but I've done a lot of work in the criminalization of poverty, and where we center that work and directly impacted folks and listen first, I will say that the state legislative process becomes so much more efficient because you understand with much more clarity what is broken, what needs fixing, and how to fix it. So this idea that you have policy wonks sitting in an office somewhere looking at data and coming up with solutions is the wrong way to go, I think, is a message that we're hearing from this conversation, that it has to be centered in communities. So I just want to pause before we go to Q&A. I think, Patty, we have a poll, is that right, for everyone to do first?
Okay, thank you all. We're trying something new and different today with polling in place. So thank you for doing that. And then we will start with the Q&A that some of you all put in the chat, which is great. So, okay, I think as everybody finished, then we'll end the poll and move on. Thank you so much.
Okay. Are we doing the poll now?
They did, everybody did. And yes, so, and the question was, how valuable did you find the first part of today's session? 53% gave it a 5, yay, thank you. 33 gave it a 4, 13% gave it a 3. So thank you all. And Phil, you can move on to some of those much more interesting questions.
Sure, well, thank you, Patty. So I was just looking at some of the questions that have come into the chat. Thank you all for submitting them. There's a question here about how predominantly white philanthropy boards where they should go to get good advice on, sort of which organizations that are Black founded or people of color founded are important to fund. I see that's also started an interesting discussion in the chat around the need to diversify boards, which I think is right. But curious, Thomas and Leah, if you have additional thoughts or advice on that question.
I don't know if I have anything else to add besides what Leah articulated so well. Like, they're out there. We are out there. We are out there, and just come out and talk with us. The thing about community organizing and coalition building, particularly here, is that we don't do this by ourselves. We work in coalition with other like-minded organizations with similar approaches to centering the leadership of those who are directly impacted. And so, we know each other, we know who's out there. And I think the most important thing is to reach out to us and build with us, talk with us, and listen to our perspectives. is what I would say.
I would say yes to Hannah. Absolutely. That should be funding people that you talk to, or compensating people for their time is a huge part of what we believe is important. Everyone in our organization, including our steering committee members, all of the people that are a part of the work that we do, are compensated for their time, because it's a huge thing. And so I also believe that that's true for organizations. And I agree with Thomas, like talking to the organizations that you work with that are led by people of color, they're going to know other places to go to talk to people who are led by organizations that are getting less funding. We know that because it's all around us. I also think that the answer, probably the systemic answer to that question, is diversify your board. And so, a lot of people say, like, how do I do that? And I think, practical ways, when people roll off, replace them with people who are directly impacted by this work. And I think it also takes a mindset shift on what a board is historically kind of created to do. I think a lot of times we think about boards as just kind of a money generator, right? Like people are being, funders, or they have, or different expertise. They're a lawyer, they're this. I think thinking about boards differently, thinking about boards as, our board is 75% people of color, people who have had all kinds of experiences related to the work that we do. And so it doesn't mean that we still don't have traditional board roles. It means that we just make sure that those board roles are filled with people who are also directly impacted. I think sometimes we think those things are mutually exclusive, and they're not. And so I think thinking about what a board is for and what a board should do, and rethinking that traditional kind of understanding of what a board is for. And also even looking at, like, I think as you're working with organizations, looking at, like, is your board actually bringing in, because I think there are studies out there that tell you that boards aren't actually bringing in the money that we think they're supposed to be bringing in. And so then what is the point? Like, right, why do we have them, and why do we, like, in the way that they are composed right now. And so thinking about bringing in not just diversity for diversity's sake, but thinking about those who are directly impacted, creating leadership opportunities for them to be on boards, is going to start to change that dynamic of understanding who should we be thinking about, who should we be funding, because you'll have people who can tell you that on your board.
You both are giving a masterclass today, and I so appreciate it. And I want to turn to one other question in the chat, because I think this is a good one. And it's asking whether either of you are aware of local foundations that are already doing a lot of the things that we've been talking about this morning, right? That they're centering equity, that they're funding grassroots organizing, that they're doing this work in the right way, or closer to that version of the right way that we've talked about. Are there organizations that come to mind for either of you?
I think here locally, I think Richmond Memorial Health Foundation is really trying to move in that direction. And I do see the Community Foundation moving in that direction too, to the extent that I think the Community Foundation's makeup is different than other foundations, and so that I'm sure poses some challenges. But I do think that I see movement actually a lot in the local foundations in Richmond, but I see kind of RMHF trying to kind of center equity and center investing in thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with sort of the local foundation space. Some of my coworkers are more so than I am, and Leah is as well. But this is outside of Virginia, a model that I am aware of and was involved with in New York, where this foundation, I think it's called the North Star Foundation, had a commitment to a model of community grant making. So there's a certain percentage of its foundation money that was decided by community organizers. So this foundation had a commitment to bringing in community organizers rooted in working class communities of color, even member leaders from some of those constituent groups, to be a part of the grant making process, right? So going out and reviewing applications and doing these site visits, and because they as community organizers and member leaders have a really deep understanding of what's at stake in terms of the work. And so I think that's a good model to think about and explore in other places.
Thanks so much to you both. I think we're pretty much out of time at this point. So I'm sure if you have other burning questions, you can send them along and we can get answers. But I just want to thank both Leah and Thomas for their incredible expertise and their time and their honesty, sharing their visions and their work. So thanks so much to both of you. Get you a round of applause here. And just happy to be with you this morning. And thanks to you all for joining.